shifting over, talking about a challenging population of patients would be the refractory relapsed, mantle cell lymphoma patients who, have had therapies available, but the long-term remissions not really as widely observed once they hit a certain number of, different therapies. And so we wanted to spotlight the Zuma 2, which I know Stanford was a part of, that trial.
Love to do that.
Yeah, and then also, of course, the recent FDA approval of Tecartus to treat relapsed refractory MCL patients. So
Mantle cell is kind of the story of my life. It's an interesting story. When I was training back at Harvard in 1995, mantle cell was first being recognized because we needed some antibody tests to be able to tell the difference of these immature lymphocytes. And so mantle cell was first being recognized. And the very first patient I actually diagnosed when a person had lymphadenopathy in my internship clinic, where usually I was treating diabetes, right, or hypertension, and I happened to meet a patient, and the therapy was terrible, and using CHOP chemotherapy had only a 3-year overall survival. Rituximab added very little to the benefits for those patients, but the development of small molecule inhibitors that are interfering with the signal from the B cell receptor to the division inside the nucleus. These are drugs that your people have heard of, ibrutinib, a drug that targets the Burton tyrosine kinase inhibitor, as well as other drugs that are, again, ibrutinib was the first, and ibrutinib is certainly the most widely used drug. A pill that you take once a day that covalently links and binds and inhibits the BTK molecule, and that cell is done. And the importance of that therapy, where everybody responds. And yet there are patients with about a 20 to 25% risk per year of progression. And once we lose that very special target, we can go on to some other medicines like venetoclax, which has also shown benefit in the mantle cells. But we've been looking for something better. Now, we've tried high-dose chemotherapy, and I'm a stem cell transplanter, so the notion of using high-dose chemotherapy with stem cell rescue, or what your patients will know as an auto transplant, has provided much benefit to the patients with mantle cell, and moves out the expected overall survival from 3 to 6 years or more. There's a role for maintenance rituximab, FDA approved, and has benefits in patients. The small molecule inhibitors, ibrutinib, venetoclax that we just discussed. But where's the home run? Where's the, again, targeted immune therapy that is going to eliminate this cancer and provide the patient a long-term cure? Some of your patients may have had an allogeneic transplant, which is truly the immune therapy of someone else's immune system. Maybe it's a brother or sister or some HLA identical donor whose blood destroys the white cells, red cells, and regrows and reconstitutes the normal blood system. And in the process of getting rid of the patient's blood system, gets rid of the white cells, the lymphocytes, the B cells, and the mantle cell lymphoma. So the allogeneic transplant is an immune therapy. And again, I am an allogeneic transplanter. We'll probably talk about the major side effect of allogeneic transplant, which is graft versus host disease. That means that the immune response is not only attacking the blood and cancer, but it's also sometimes attacking the skin, the gut, the liver, causing detrimental inflammatory problems that can be the real bane of the existence of the patient, the quality of life and the difficulties with organ involvement across the whole body has been seen. And those patients are really dependent on immune suppression. So where's the home run? The home run is, again, CAR T. And that is the company that brought us the axi-cell therapy, the first FDA-approved treatment in large cell lymphoma. That company is called Kite. They were purchased by Gilead, and they brought forward a very similar construct. I mean, the actual molecule that's placed into the patient's lymphocytes is exactly the same as what's been used for the last 3 years in large cell lymphoma. So it binds the same CD19. Again, same story. Here comes the CAR. We're going to bind, and we're going to then kill the cancer. It's prepared in a very special way because mantle cell frequently has lymphoma in the blood. So we have to separate the lymphocytes away. And that's the unique difference between Tecartus and Yescarta. Otherwise, they're nearly identical therapies. And the prep to do this, the apheresis, the places where you'll receive the therapy, the lymphodepletion chemotherapy, and the 3 days before we put the special cells in, all the same. the follow-up, staying in the hospital 7 to 10 days, staying locally for 28 days, all the same. And the expected toxicities of cytokine release syndrome, that's the fever, achy flu-like symptoms, or the confusion and neurological problems that can follow patients who have had the cytokine release syndrome. Again, very similar incidents. We maybe should come back and talk more about that because we want to make sure patients understand. But here's the excitement. The excitement is in that study you addressed called Zuma 2, which began back in 2017, there were 60 patients treated, and this overall response rate was 93%, and the overall complete response rate, couldn't find the cancer, was 67%. So 2/3 of the patients, 28 days after getting the Tecartus infused in their body, had no measurable cancer, a complete response, and that response has remained durable. Now, the publication that is responsible for the FDA's approval showed 27 months of follow-up in patients. So that's not, 27 months, that's just over 2 years. So let's not get carried away. We have 2 years of follow-up. And in that population, the response rate was, I have to look at my slide. Yep. 43% remaining in complete response and 67% overall response. So very durable, probably even more durable than what we saw in the original treatment with axi-cell and large cell lymphoma. Similar side effects, still needs to be done inside the hospital at centers that have experience managing patients with CAR T, but higher response rates, and they appear to be very durable treatments. And these are for patients who had had 3 lines of therapy previously. So they'd had probably CHOP or bendamustine rituximab. They probably had ibrutinib as one of their therapies. That trial required that they'd had a drug that targeted the Burton tyrosine kinase. Now, the FDA, when they made the approval of this therapy in July, recognizing what a game changer the therapy offered patients, did not require that patients go through 3 lines of therapy. The FDA has authorized the treatment in second line, and I think that's because they really want to help patients achieve long-term disease-free survival and benefit. Now, the physicians will have to decide who should receive BTK inhibitors and who should go right on to CAR T cells, and that discussion with the patients and the family. And that really is still being worked out. And we're going to be doing a new trial where we'll be looking at patients who'd had ibrutinib up front or who had not had ibrutinib yet, and using the same therapy to see what the true incidence of benefit is in that second line. But in the meantime, there are centers that can provide commercially available therapy with Tecartus today. And in somebody who's gone through all the available therapies, that's a lifesaver. And as we decide whether we should use CAR T cells in second line, we will, that's an individual decision at this point for the patients and their doctors.
Right. You summed up so much. Like, I'm in awe of how you boiled that all down again.
That's all I talk about, This is like 6 in the morning till midnight, right? I'm
And
sorry.
you've got the right person. But hearing all these great numbers, right? And that, look, it sounds like it's such a great option, especially, I mean, now it's been approved for second line. So what the question I would pose is, for mantle cell lymphoma patients and their families, why wouldn't they? Is it just a cost prohibitive issue?
I think that's an excellent question. And again, I think we have to make sure that the therapy does not cause more toxicity than the patient's need warrants. And again, what I think is going to happen is we're going to see less CHOP chemotherapy up front. We'll probably be shifting more to the kinder, gentler bendamustine rituximab, and maybe even in combination with ibrutinib in the first-line therapy. And the intent of that is to really clear the disease, make sure that we get the highest response rate possible with the lowest toxicities and the frequency of going into the hospital with side effects like neutropenic fevers. So we want to avoid that. I think that's where the field is moving. And then the key decision, and again, I'm the chief of transplant, so I don't want to really malign my own therapy, but whether or not auto transplant continues to be important in the management of mantle cell versus going right on to a targeted cellular therapy is really the next question. And so that decision needs to be made. What we're trying to judge is what's the risk of the patient having cytokine release syndrome or really high impact, very debilitating neurological toxicity A grade 3 neurological toxicity is when the patient's really unresponsive in the hospital, just laying there, eyes open, frequently having expressive aphasia, can't talk to you, can't find the words, can't attend. And that period of time lasts usually 2 to 3 days, and patients are being treated with steroids. Now, young people like us, we may have ability to have the reserve to get through something like that and easily bounce back. But if you were 80 years old and having the similar treatment options and trying to decide, I imagine the ibrutinib therapy would be the more appropriate treatment for somebody who's 80 years old, and at least until it's not working. And guess what? While patients are receiving those better tolerated, maybe not curative, but very well tolerated therapies with very good efficiency of efficacies, we're working on new therapies, right? We're working on kinder, more gentler therapies, less toxicities. And the companies that we're mentioning here are fully committed to trying to improve these treatments. Whereas maybe the drugs that you took for your blood pressure and your diabetes are still the same drugs after 20 years. These drugs will not be the same drugs after 5 years. We will be moving the development curve cycle into a very rapid change, because knowledge is what is going to drive the next therapy. And as we learn how to help the patients, how to improve the treatments, what happens at the universities will quickly disseminate through pharmaceutical companies to the patient's care. It's a very exciting time. And it's these small clinical trials that are able to demonstrate clinical benefit, but at the same time, we're collecting blood samples and lymph node samples that allow us to test, how did it work? How did the CAR expand? Did it go into the lymph node? Did the lymph node stop making the target? And how do we make this treatment better? So we call that the virtuous cycle of correlative clinical trials, and that's what these large academic centers are all about. And we're trying to turn that cycle as fast as we can. Now that's a partnership with our patients. So when your patients go to a cancer center and the doctor says, we have a clinical research trial and we have the standard of care, it's important to listen closely. Again, there are very good treatments in the upfront use of Tisacel, Axicel, and again, soon Lysacel. So we want to be able to offer those therapies to people with 60% complete response rates. But if you are having recurrence of disease after that therapy, or that therapy is not appropriate, then it's important to maybe consider participating on a clinical trial in order to get access to the more promising treatments. And that's the hardest conversation. And bring all your friends, bring your family to the doctor's visit. You're going to need lots of ears to be listening to why you should do this, or you could consider these other options. That decision of how to choose is yes, your doctor should be making recommendations, but you too have to participate as you consider the benefits and the risks.